I am the self-help hacker, sharing the cheat codes to life that I didn't have when I was the same age as you. Why should you have to learn the hard way when you can learn the easy way from some random guy on the internet? Clearly that's the way to go. Random guy on the internet wins every time. Here's the truth that it's time to accept. Sometimes you may be the only strong communicator in your circle, whether that's in your class or whether that's in your office or whether that's in your family or whether that's into every room that you walk into. You may be the strongest communicator. And if you're not, aspire to become that. I feel that most people by default, and I made a video, most people are basic. So most people don't know how to communicate well. I want to give you several examples based on good and bad things, and to help you realize you can be the person that's good at it, because ultimately people are going to respect you. And respect and the perception of confidence is a major currency in our everyday lives. Let's look at a few examples. You may have seen the video that I made talking about the difference between people who have a victorious mindset versus a victim mentality. So let's look at how communication could be involved in these. So someone who's victorious, they're going to compliment others. So obviously that's going to be a better communication. If you make a point to compliment others, not superficially, like, hey, I like your shirt, like something like, man, I really like what you said a minute ago when you said this. I never thought about that way before. Something as simple as that can go a long way as far as you being seen as a good communicator. Because victims, they do the opposite. They criticize others. It's funny because there's something I call gossip by proximity. So maybe you're not gossiping about other people, talking about them, but if you stand and listen and shake your head and say, yeah, then they can take that and say, oh yeah, he even agrees or she even agrees because, yeah, we were talking about that. They'll associate you into their gossip. So it's a matter of, if someone's gossiping, talking about someone else, you disappear and you don't shake your head and you don't acknowledge it. You get out of there. You do not want to be part of that, because ultimately you're criticizing others by default instead of building them up. Looking through some of these other ones on here, I talk about how a person who's victorious embraces change, whereas a victim fears change. So you're going to hear that in communication. If you are someone who's victorious, you're going to talk about things about how you're willing to change and things you're willing to do. Meanwhile, you're going to contrast yourself against the victim mentality, who's, oh no, what are we going to do when this thing happens? I don't know what to do now. Well, you can be the person that they trust and respect because you're talking more positively and proactive about what you can actually do, because it's a matter of focusing on what you can control, not on what you can't. Also, when it comes to communication, people who are good communicators forgive others. Meanwhile, people who are not are going to hold grudges. And you're going to hear that in communication. It's a matter of being able to forgive yourself, being able to forgive other people in real time, instead of holding grudges. I read an article recently about this company that just a few weeks ago went out of business. And I guess the owner of the company, the CEO, was like in his 70s or something. And he was very bitter that there were changes in the industry that had taken place. And he lost a lot of employees due to these changes. Ultimately, he didn't keep up with it. And he kept a lot of old talent instead of recruiting new talent that could keep up with the changes. So in this article, he was very bitter. And I guess I'll censor this. But ultimately, he said to people who were causing those changes, he said, well, how do I censor it? He says they can just go do something in some place that no one wants to go to. So it was very obvious that he had a victim mentality, that he couldn't keep up with the changes, and he was ultimately holding a grudge against the fact that life changed and the rules changed in his industry. Not only because I don't speak in profanity on a normal basis, but also YouTube is very sensitive about any words. So I want to make sure that my video doesn't get flagged. Moving on to the next one. Someone who is victorious is always learning, and you're going to hear that in someone who's communicating well. They're always learning, they're always teaching other people what they learned. But someone who's a victim thinks they know everything. So you're going to hear someone sound like a know-it-all and sound like they don't need to learn anything new. You're going to hear that in the way they communicate. Someone who's victorious accepts responsibility for the failures. And by default, people respect someone who says, oh yeah, you know what, I made a mistake. I really thought I was supposed to do this, but it turns out that was a bad call. Now I know. Well, people are going to respect you because they can learn from your mistake, and you're being very open about it. You're not blaming somebody else for your perceived failure like a victim would do. Someone who's victorious has a sense of gratitude, and someone who's a victim has a sense of entitlement. So when you would much rather be someone around who's into, it's another Monday. Obviously, you want to be the opposite of that person. You're like, yep, it is Monday, but man, at least there's this happening, and that's going to get me through the day. And then lastly, someone who's victorious sets goals and develops plans. A victim never sets goals, is basically surprised by the future. And it's a matter of, if you're a good communicator, you're going to actually be helping people with their own life, sort their own stuff out, instead of not knowing what's going on. So even when we look at this list of people who are victorious minded versus victim mentality, we can see that. And I also had made a list of talking about the way that I think society perceives confidence, because I think confidence is a major currency that we're judged on and tested on, even by default, even subconsciously by people. But just to rattle those out real quick: someone who's confident, someone who respects women and helps his fellow man, someone who finds their own unique skill set, they're aware what they're good at and what they're bad at. Next, someone who strives to be healthy and active, taking care of their body, that's important. Someone who's decisive, someone who's committed, someone who embraces leadership skills. It's funny, there it is on there, I put it on my list, a good communicator. And in parentheses I put on my list here, can make complicated concepts seem simple. Next, they're funny. See, don't compare yourself to a certain kind of humor. There's so many different kinds of humor. If you can make a person laugh, it doesn't even actually have to be funny. Sometimes we're just laughing and then we start smiling and shaking our head, and the other person does too, and that makes them laugh, even though there's no humor involved in the sentence. It's funny how you can make a person laugh without being funny, but as a mannerism itself, it's funny how that works. And then lastly, someone who's emotionally intelligent. In other words, someone who acknowledges their emotions but does not assign them to other people and does not assign them to events that do not deserve that emotion. Very seldom do we actually need to assign that emotion to another person or an event. Usually we just let there be no emotional attachment, because most things don't actually deserve that. But our bodies are wired in a way that we think that we have to be emotional about most things, when we need to be emotional about very little things. In reality, it's a matter of being calm and assertive. But as I look through all of these lists I've kept up over the years, you can see how in confidence, you can see how communication is tied up in all of this. So ultimately, when we think of a poor communicator, we're going to think of someone who is that victim mentality. They think the sky is falling all the time. And we can see this in the way that people gossip and talk about each other. But it's funny, if you refuse to do that, people automatically respect you. Because ultimately, if you're willing to talk about someone behind their back, then what is that saying about how they're going to think you? Oh, well, I can't be myself, because if they're going to find something wrong with me, then they're going to tell the next person, simply by you getting involved in that. So communication is so important, but yet a lot of people will acknowledge, oh, well, there's a breakdown in communication. My question is, what are you willing to do about it? Are you willing to be the change agent? Are you willing to set that example that they need to see? Because often people are closed-minded to good advice. When you try to tell them that, they're often closed-minded. The way that you can actually influence people is by modeling that behavior. And like I've said in other videos, and I earn like 3 thumbs down every time I say it in a video. It's funny, because what does that say about the person who's doing that? I hope he suffers because he said something I don't like. But the thing that people don't like that I say is that your opinion doesn't actually matter. And I firmly believe that. So that means my opinion doesn't matter either. Our opinions are not changing the world. They're not changing laws. They're not changing people's minds. They're not changing the perceived problem. Ultimately, what changes it is when we model the correct behavior that we want to see other people do. We have to be able to do that ourselves. And that ties into communication. So you don't like the way people communicate, the first thing you have to do is to realize how to be the opposite of them and start communicating and ultimately acting the opposite of what they're doing. Because ultimately, if nothing else, people are going to start respecting you and you're going to actually stand out in a good way. Your comments belong right here.